Move, old man. Being a black mechanic doesn't make you a fighter pilot. Chief Petty Officer Blake Mercer ripped the inspection clipboard from Marcus Reed's hands and slammed it onto the maintenance cart. Several SEALs laughed. Marcus stood beside the fighter jet, grease staining his faded coveralls and dark hands. "That aircraft isn't safe," Marcus warned. Mercer grabbed a wrench from the cart and shoved it against Marcus's chest. "Then hold this and remember your place. Men like us fly into danger. Men like you clean up after us." The laughter grew louder. Marcus caught the wrench before it fell. Mercer looked him up and down with a contemptuous smile. "Take away that toolbox, and nobody here would even know you existed." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he refused to give Mercer the anger he wanted. Then 3 fighter jets rolled onto the apron. The lead pilot climbed down, removed his helmet, and froze when he saw Marcus. He walked straight past Mercer. His boots snapped together. He saluted. Then another pilot saluted. Then another. Within seconds, every fighter pilot stood at attention before the black mechanic Mercer had just humiliated. Mercer's face went pale. "Stay with this story, because what these pilots know about Marcus will change everything." Comment your city and local time below, and subscribe if you believe a person's worth should never be judged by the clothes they wear or the job they do. 3 days earlier, before a single fighter pilot raised a hand in salute, Marcus Reed arrived at Falcon Ridge Joint Air Station while the Nevada desert was still wrapped in darkness. At 5:17 a.m., the maintenance hangar was nearly silent. Marcus preferred it that way. He walked beneath the fluorescent lights carrying a metal thermos in one hand and his battered toolbox in the other. At 52, he moved more slowly than some of the younger mechanics. But there was nothing uncertain about him. His faded navy coveralls carried old grease stains that never completely washed out. His boots were scratched. His hands were rough from years around metal, hydraulic fluid, and engines. "Morning, Marcus?" 26-year-old mechanic Tyler Grant looked up from a diagnostic terminal. Marcus nodded. "Morning." That was usually all anyone got before his first coffee. The maintenance crew respected Marcus, although few knew much about him. He never talked about family photographs, never told stories about where he had worked before Falcon Ridge, never joined conversations when military veterans compared deployments. But everyone knew one thing: Marcus could hear things in aircraft that machines sometimes missed. Once, he had identified a failing bearing from a vibration almost nobody else noticed. Another time, he had stopped an engine test after hearing a faint, irregular pulse buried beneath the roar of the turbine. Both times, inspection proved him right. Tyler jokingly called it Marcus's sixth sense. Marcus always corrected him. "Machines talk. Most people just don't listen long enough." That morning, Falcon Ridge was preparing for one of its largest joint exercises of the year. Fighter aircraft lined the flight line beneath powerful floodlights. Ground crews moved equipment between hangars. Transport vehicles crossed the concrete as the eastern horizon slowly turned orange. A visiting SEAL unit had arrived the previous evening. Marcus first saw them shortly after sunrise. 6 men entered the maintenance area wearing tactical training gear. At their center walked Chief Petty Officer Blake Mercer. Mercer carried himself like a man accustomed to people moving aside. 38, broad-shouldered and decorated with years of operational experience, he had earned genuine respect in difficult places. Unfortunately, he had begun believing that respect belonged automatically to him. Tyler was inspecting equipment near the entrance when Mercer tossed a duffel onto Marcus's workbench. "Move that." Marcus looked at the bag, then at Mercer. "You can put it against the wall." Mercer stared at him. "I said move it." Marcus calmly tightened a socket onto his wrench. "This bench is for aircraft components." 2 SEALs exchanged amused looks. Mercer stepped closer. "You always this friendly?" "Only before 6. Tyler nearly smiled. Mercer didn't. His eyes traveled over Marcus's stained coveralls. "So you're the cleanup crew. Aircraft maintenance. Same difference." Marcus returned to his work. That seemed to bother Mercer more than an argument would have. Mercer picked up a small metal component from the bench. Marcus immediately extended his hand. "Put that down." Mercer raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "That component has already been inspected and cleaned." Mercer slowly placed it back, then wiped his fingers dramatically against Marcus's shoulder. "There. Now we're both dirty." 2 men behind him laughed. Tyler's expression hardened. Marcus simply looked at the grease mark Mercer had deliberately left on his coveralls. "Chief," Tyler said, "you don't need to—" "Tyler." Marcus's voice stopped him. Marcus shook his head once. Mercer smiled. "Smart man. At least he knows when to keep his mouth shut." He collected his duffel and walked away. Tyler waited until the group disappeared. Why did you let him talk to you like that? Marcus resumed tightening the component. Because my job is to keep airplanes safe. He treated you like you were nothing. Marcus paused. For a moment, something older appeared behind his eyes. Something Tyler couldn't identify. You don't have to win every argument people invite you into. Then Marcus returned to work. By 8 o'clock, Falcon Ridge was alive. Engines thundered. Radio calls crackled across the hangar. Fighters were being prepared for training sorties scheduled throughout the day. Mercer crossed the maintenance floor again with 2 members of his team. This time, he stopped when he saw Marcus examining a landing assembly. Still turning wrenches? Marcus didn't look up. Still touching things that don't belong to you? Tyler coughed to hide a laugh. Mercer's smile disappeared. You know, mechanic, people like us are the reason places like this exist. Marcus slowly stood. No. Mercer folded his arms. No? Places like this exist because thousands of people do their jobs correctly. Pilots, mechanics, fuel crews, controllers, everybody. Mercer stepped closer. And you think you're equal to the men actually going into danger? Marcus met his eyes. I think an aircraft doesn't care about your ego. Silence fell around them. Mercer's jaw tightened. Before he could respond, an engine started outside. A fighter on the nearby test line began running its turbine. The roar filled the hangar. Marcus suddenly turned his head. His entire expression changed. Mercer was still talking, but Marcus wasn't listening anymore. He walked toward the hangar doors. Tyler followed. What is it? Marcus lifted one hand. Quiet. The turbine climbed through its power range. Thousands of mechanical sounds blended together. To everyone else, it sounded powerful. Normal. Marcus listened for another 5 seconds. Then his eyes narrowed. Run that again. Tyler stared at him. What did you hear? Marcus didn't answer. The fighter's engine increased power once more. There. A tiny hesitation. Almost nothing. But Marcus heard it. His face became grave. Which aircraft is that? Tyler checked the board. Falcon 2-7, Captain Evan Cole's jet. Marcus grabbed his inspection kit. Across the hangar, Mercer watched him and laughed. What now, mechanic? Engine not singing your favorite song? Marcus walked straight past him. For the first time that morning, there was urgency in his voice. Get the crew chief. Tyler hurried after him. Marcus, what's wrong? Marcus stared at the fighter waiting beneath the Nevada sun. Something about that sound had reached into a part of his memory he had spent years trying to bury. And he knew one thing with absolute certainty. That aircraft doesn't leave the ground until I find it. Marcus reached Falcon 2-7 before the turbine had fully wound down. Heat rolled from the fighter as Captain Evan Cole climbed from the cockpit. Evan was 31, disciplined, confident, and already dressed for the morning sortie. What happened? He asked. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He crouched beside the aircraft and opened an access panel. Run the flight control diagnostic again. The crew chief frowned. We ran it 20 minutes ago. Everything passed. Run it again. A voice came from behind them. You grounding my aircraft because you heard a funny noise? Mercer approached with 2 seals. Marcus ignored him. The diagnostic sequence began. Numbers moved across Tyler's tablet. Everything appeared normal. Mercer smiled. There, congratulations. You just wasted everyone's time. Marcus studied the readings. Then he pointed. That. Tyler leaned closer. A value had fluctuated for less than a second. Evan noticed it too. What is that? Possible actuator response delay. Mercer laughed. Possible? Marcus stood. This aircraft needs a full inspection. We have a joint exercise starting in less than 2 hours. Then use another aircraft. Mercer stepped directly into Marcus's path. You don't cancel a mission because some civilian mechanic has a feeling. It isn't a feeling. Marcus took the inspection clipboard and wrote across the authorization line. Aircraft hold flight control inspection required. Mercer stared at the words. You're serious? Yes. Mercer ripped the clipboard from Marcus's hand and threw it onto the maintenance table. The metallic crash turned heads across the flight line. You're a mechanic, Mercer snapped. Not a pilot, not mission command, not someone who gets to decide whether operators do their jobs. Marcus's expression remained steady. My signature says that aircraft stays down until it's safe. Mercer moved closer. You enjoy this? Enjoy what? Feeling important. Marcus looked toward Falcon 2-7. If I'm wrong, you lose a few hours. Then he looked directly at Mercer. If I'm right, somebody keeps breathing. That silenced several people nearby. Evan studied Marcus differently now. There had been no hesitation in those words. No drama. Marcus sounded like a man who had made that calculation before. Colonel Sarah Bennett arrived minutes later. As Falcon Ridge's commanding officer, She had already been informed that an aircraft scheduled for the exercise had been unexpectedly grounded. "What's the problem?" Mercer answered first. "Overreaction." Marcus answered second. "Flight control actuator response." Sarah looked between them. "Evidence?" Marcus showed her the diagnostic fluctuation. "It's small," Sarah said. "On the ground." Marcus tapped the reading. "Under high, G load, small doesn't stay small." Evan's eyes narrowed. That was an unusually specific observation for a civilian mechanic. Mercer shook his head. "Colonel, we're losing valuable training time because this guy thinks he can hear mechanical ghosts." Sarah didn't smile. "Aircraft remains grounded until maintenance clears it." Mercer's face hardened. "Yes, ma'am," but his eyes stayed on Marcus. The inspection began. Panels were removed. Connections were checked. For nearly an hour, nothing obvious appeared. Mercer's confidence returned with every passing minute. Finally, he walked toward Marcus carrying the inspection report. "Still nothing. We're not finished." Mercer lowered his voice. "You know what I think?" Marcus kept working. "I think you saw all these uniforms and wanted somebody to notice you." Marcus stopped. Mercer continued. "Maybe this is the closest you've ever gotten to being one of the men who actually fly these things." Marcus slowly raised his eyes. Evan was standing close enough to hear. Something shifted in Marcus's expression, but it disappeared almost immediately. "You finished?" Mercer smiled. "Touched a nerve?" "No." Marcus returned to the actuator housing. "Then why do you look angry?" "Because you're distracting people responsible for keeping your teammates alive." Mercer's smile vanished. Hours later, the fighter remained grounded, but the first inspection had still revealed no definitive failure. Pressure increased. Replacement aircraft were limited. Exercise Command wanted Falcon 27 returned to service if possible. Mercer used every delay against Marcus. By afternoon, Sarah authorized an expanded inspection but requested a formal justification for keeping the aircraft grounded. Marcus signed it without hesitation. Evan found him alone beside the fighter. "You've flown before, haven't you?" Marcus continued examining a connector. "I've been around aircraft." "That's not what I asked." Marcus looked at him. Evan lowered his voice. "The way you talked about high G load, the way you watched my control surfaces. Mechanics don't usually look at a fighter like that." "Good mechanics do." Evan almost smiled. "Okay." He started walking away. Marcus suddenly spoke. "Captain." Evan turned. Marcus hesitated. For the first time, the older man's calm exterior seemed to crack. "If they clear this aircraft and you get that warning light under load, don't fight it." Evan stared at him. "What?" "Don't waste time trying to recover something that won't respond." Marcus's voice became quieter. "Eject." The word hung between them. Evan studied Marcus's face. There was something in his eyes now. "Not theory. Memory." "How do you know that?" Marcus said nothing. Across the flight line, Mercer watched them from a distance. His expression darkened. He had already decided Marcus Reed was becoming a problem. And before the day was over, he intended to make sure the mechanic learned exactly where Mercer believed he belonged. By 4 that afternoon, Blake Mercer had found his weapon. Paperwork. Marcus was beneath Falcon 27 when maintenance supervisor George Miller approached with Colonel Sarah Bennett. Marcus saw their expressions and slid out from beneath the aircraft. "What happened?" George held a document. Mercer filed a formal complaint. Marcus wiped his hands on a rag. "For what?" "Interfering with operational readiness. Exceeding civilian maintenance authority. Disrupting exercise personnel." Marcus almost smiled. "That's creative." George didn't. "Until command reviews it, you're temporarily restricted from the active flight line." Tyler stared at him. "You're kidding." "Tyler," Marcus warned. "No, he's the one trying to keep the aircraft safe." Across the hangar, Mercer watched. Marcus could see the satisfaction on his face. Sarah stepped closer. "This isn't a judgment against you. It's procedure." Marcus looked toward Falcon 27. "And the aircraft?" "Still grounded." That was enough. Marcus removed his flight line access badge and handed it to George. Mercer walked over just as Marcus collected his toolbox. "Well," he said, "looks like somebody finally remembered who's a mechanic and who's actually part of the mission." Tyler stepped forward. Marcus caught his arm. "Don't." Mercer smiled. "You should listen to him, kid. You don't want to wreck your career defending a man who doesn't have one." Marcus stopped. For several seconds, he stared at Mercer. Then he picked up his toolbox. "Inspect the actuator." Mercer laughed. "You're still giving orders?" Marcus looked at Evan, who stood nearby. "No." He walked toward the old maintenance hangar. "I'm asking someone to stay alive." The words followed Evan long after Marcus disappeared. That evening, the exercise continued around Falcon Ridge, but Falcon 27 remained silent. Evan couldn't forget Marcus's warning. "If that warning light appears under load, Don't fight the aircraft. Eject. At 6:40 p.m., Evan found Tyler. I want another actuator inspection. Tyler looked toward the supervisor's office. We already checked it. Not deep enough. Together, they requested authorization for a bench test. Meanwhile, Marcus sat alone in Hangar 3. It was an older building used mostly for spare components and equipment storage. He opened his locker. Inside were work gloves, a flashlight, 2 manuals, and a small metal box scratched by age. Marcus stared at it for a long time. Then he opened it. Inside lay something wrapped in dark cloth. His fingers stopped above it. Suddenly, the quiet hangar disappeared. Static screamed inside his memory. Warning alarms, heavy breathing through an oxygen mask. Then a voice. Atlas, I'm hit. Marcus shut his eyes. Another voice followed through the remembered radio. Atlas, we can't hold formation. Then the first voice again. Weak this time. Get them home, Commander. Marcus's hand trembled. He closed the metal box. Hard. The hangar returned. No alarms. No burning sky. Only an old mechanic sitting beneath fluorescent lights. Marcus lowered his head. Not tonight. The door suddenly opened. Evan hurried inside. Marcus. Marcus immediately pushed the box deeper into the locker. Evan barely noticed. He was carrying a maintenance report. We found something. Marcus stood. Evan placed the report on the workbench. We removed the actuator and ran it under simulated load. Marcus read the first line. His expression didn't change. Evan's hot. There's a hairline fracture in the internal housing. Marcus remained silent. At normal ground pressure, it holds. Evan continued. Under sustained high load, the fracture expands. Pressure drops. Response becomes unpredictable. Marcus slowly exhaled. Exactly what he had feared. Evan looked shaken. If I'd taken Falcon 2, 7 up today, you didn't. I could have. Marcus folded the report. But you didn't. Evan stared at him. You saved my life. Marcus looked away. I inspected an aircraft. No. Evan stepped closer. You knew exactly what would happen. Marcus said nothing. You knew what warning I'd see. You knew what the controls would feel like. You even knew when I'd have to eject. Silence. Who are you? Marcus's eyes hardened. A mechanic. Evan shook his head. I don't believe that anymore. Footsteps sounded outside. Tuller entered. Colonel Bennett wants the report immediately. Then he looked at Marcus. And Mercer already heard. Across the base, Mercer stood inside the operations building, reading the preliminary findings. For the first time all day, there was no smile on his face. Marcus had been right. Completely right. But instead of regret, something uglier settled inside Mercer. If Marcus returned to the flight line now, everyone would remember who had tried to silence him. Mercer folded the report. He wasn't ready to let that happen. Back in Hangar 3, Marcus opened his locker one last time after Evan and Tyler left. The metal box remained where he had pushed it, but the cloth had shifted. Beneath it, a corner of an old photograph was visible. A younger Marcus stood in a flight suit beside a fighter aircraft, and across the helmet tucked beneath his arm was a single word, Atlas. The fractured actuator sat beneath a white inspection lamp the next morning. It looked harmless, a compact piece of metal no larger than a man's forearm. But under magnification, the truth became impossible to ignore. A thin crack ran through the internal housing. Colonel Sarah Bennett stood beside the maintenance table as George Miller explained the finding. At normal pressure, it holds. Under sustained high G loading, the crack expands. And then? Sarah asked. George glanced toward Evan. Hydraulic pressure drops. Control response becomes intermittent. Evan finished the thought. And eventually I lose control. Nobody spoke. Marcus stood several feet away with his arms folded. His flight line privileges had been restored 30 minutes earlier. Evan approached him. You heard that from an engine test? Marcus shook his head. I heard enough to know where to look. You saved my life. Marcus met his eyes. I did my job. That wasn't just your job. Before Marcus could answer, Mercer entered. He looked at the damaged actuator, then at the small crowd gathered around it. So we found a crack. Evan turned sharply. A crack that could have killed me. Mercer shrugged, and maintenance caught it. Marcus caught it. Mercer's eyes moved toward him. Let's not turn the guy into a superhero. Mechanics find broken parts every day. Tyler stared at him in disbelief. You tried to get the jet cleared. Mercer stepped toward Tyler. Careful! Marcus immediately moved between them. Leave him out of this. Mercer smiled coldly. There he is, hero of the hangar. Marcus remained calm. Is there something you need? Yeah. I need everyone to stop pretending you predicted the future. Marcus pointed toward the actuator. I didn't predict anything. Metal doesn't care what either of us believes. Mercer's jaw tightened. Sarah interrupted. That's enough. Everyone fell silent. The aircraft was unsafe. Mr. Reed identified the problem. That is the end of the discussion. Mercer gave a stiff nod. Yes, ma'am. But as he walked away, Marcus saw something in his face. Humiliation. And humiliation, Marcus knew, could make proud men dangerous. Later that morning, Sarah sat alone in her office staring at Marcus's employment file. Something bothered her. His technical knowledge was too broad. His understanding of flight dynamics was too instinctive. And then there was the way he had warned Evan. Not like an engineer describing a theoretical failure, like a pilot remembering one. Sarah scrolled backward. Falcon Ridge employment, private aerospace maintenance, civilian certification programs. Then nothing. Almost 8 years of Marcus Reed's professional history seemed strangely thin. She opened another database. Restricted service record. Sarah leaned closer. Interesting. She entered her command credentials. Access denied. That made her even more curious. Across the base, Evan found Marcus inspecting another fighter. Can I ask you something? You're going to anyway. Evan smiled. Were you military? Marcus continued checking a hydraulic line. A long time ago. Air Force? Marcus didn't answer. Pilot? Still nothing. Evan crouched beside him. I saw your face yesterday when you told me to eject. Marcus stopped working. For a moment, Evan wondered if he had pushed too far. Then Marcus spoke quietly. Machines have limits. So do people. Marcus looked at him. Evan continued. Whatever happened to you, I'm not asking because I'm curious. Then why? Because yesterday you trusted your experience enough to protect me when everyone else thought you were wrong. Marcus returned his attention to the aircraft. That's all you need to know. Evan stood. As he turned away, Mercer appeared near the hangar entrance. He had heard enough. A long time ago, huh? Marcus sighed. Mercer approached. So that's what this is. What? You were in uniform once. Marcus said nothing. Mercer laughed. I've met your type. Tyler looked up from a nearby workstation. Mercer continued. Guys who served 20 years ago and spend the rest of their lives making sure everybody knows. Marcus slowly straightened. Funny. Mercer frowned. What? You know almost nothing about me, yet you keep inventing versions that make you feel bigger. Tyler lowered his head to hide a smile. Mercer's face hardened. Whatever you did back then, you're not that anymore. Marcus picked up his wrench. Maybe that's the difference between us. What is? I don't need to be. Mercer stood motionless as Marcus walked away. That afternoon, Sarah requested elevated authorization for Marcus's archived service record. The response arrived shortly before sunset. Access granted. She closed her office door. The first page loaded. A photograph appeared. Marcus was younger by nearly 20 years. He wasn't wearing mechanic's coveralls. He wore a flight suit. Sarah stopped breathing for a moment. She scrolled. Combat Aviation Qualification. Advanced Fighter Weapons Instruction. Multiple operational commendations. Command appointments. Then she reached the line that made her sit back. Colonel Marcus Reed. Former commanding officer. Sarah stared at the screen. No way. She continued. A photograph showed Marcus standing beside a squadron of fighter pilots. Across the helmet under his arm was one word. Atlas. Sarah searched the call sign. Dozens of archived references appeared. Training doctrine. Combat leadership citations. After-action reports. Names of pilots who had later become senior officers, all connected to Marcus Reed. Then Sarah opened one final restricted summary. Her expression changed. The document concerned Marcus's last mission. 1 aircraft lost. 1 pilot killed. Voluntary retirement request submitted months later. Sarah slowly leaned back. The quiet mechanic being mocked on her flight line hadn't merely served. He had commanded men in the sky. And somewhere inside Falcon Ridge, Blake Mercer was preparing another complaint against a man whose history he still knew absolutely nothing about. Sarah Bennett read the file twice, then a third time. The quiet black mechanic working beneath the Nevada sun had once commanded an entire fighter wing. Marcus Reed had flown combat missions, trained younger pilots, helped rewrite emergency procedures, and earned commendations. Sarah had only seen attached to names discussed in military history lectures. But one document mattered more than all the others. Final mission report. Sarah opened it. Hours later, she found Marcus alone in Hangar 3. He was rebuilding a hydraulic pump at an old workbench. We need to talk. Marcus didn't look up. About Falcon 2-7? About Atlas. The wrench stopped moving. Silence filled the hangar. Marcus slowly raised his eyes. How did you find that name? I accessed your archived service record. You shouldn't have. I'm the installation commander investigating a safety dispute involving you. Marcus set down the wrench. So, now you know. I know Colonel Marcus Reed commanded the 91st Tactical Fighter Wing. That man retired. I know you trained pilots who are commanding squadrons today. Marcus turned away. And I know about your last mission. That stopped him. Sarah immediately regretted how quickly she had said it. Marcus stared toward the open hangar doors. Outside, a fighter crossed the distant runway. You read the report? Yes. Then you know what happened. I know what the investigation concluded. Marcus gave a humorless smile. Investigations don't hear voices over the radio at 3 in the morning. Sarah waited. For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. Then he zapped. His name was Nathan Cole. Sarah recognized it from the report. Marcus continued. Nate and I flew together for 11 years. He was the kind of pilot who could make you laugh while every warning light in the cockpit was screaming. His eyes remained on the floor. The mission went bad before we reached the target area. Weather shifted. Intelligence was incomplete. We had people trapped below us and enemy fire coming from 2 directions. Sarah listened silently. Nate took a hit covering our withdrawal. Marcus's voice became quieter. I heard him breathing over the radio. The memory returned with brutal clarity. Atlas, I'm hit. He told me to take the others home. Marcus swallowed. So I did. You followed the correct procedure. I left him there. You saved the rest of your formation. I left him there. Sarah understood then. Marcus wasn't describing a tactical decision. He was describing the sentence he had repeated to himself for years. The review cleared you, she said. Paper cleared me. Marcus looked at his scarred hands. My head never did. Sarah sat opposite him. Why become a mechanic? Marcus glanced toward the aircraft outside. Because airplanes were the only things I still understood. He paused. When I commanded, every decision affected dozens of lives. After Nate, I didn't want anyone depending on my orders anymore. So you disappeared. I stepped away. You went from commanding a fighter wing to repairing aircraft anonymously. Marcus finally looked at her. An airplane doesn't care about rank. If something's broken, you fix it. Sarah studied him. You could teach again. No. You could advise flight safety. No. Marcus, I didn't come back here to be saluted. His voice wasn't angry. It was tired. I came back because airplanes still need people who listen. Sarah nodded slowly. Does anyone here know? No. Mercer? Especially not Mercer. Despite herself, Sarah almost smiled. Then Marcus's expression hardened. I want it kept that way. Sarah hesitated. As long as it doesn't become operationally necessary. That's not exactly a promise. It's the best one a commander can give you. Marcus accepted that. Outside the hangar, neither noticed a figure disappear around the corner. Mercer hadn't heard everything, but he had seen Sarah enter, and he had seen the door close. That was enough. By afternoon, Mercer was in the operations office questioning George Miller. Why is Bennett having private meetings with Reed? George barely looked up. Ask Colonel Bennett. His restriction gets lifted, she starts protecting him, and suddenly everyone's treating him like he's untouchable. He found a defect that could have killed a pilot. He found a crack. George finally looked at him. Those are the same thing when you're 30,000 feet up. Mercer walked away furious. He no longer believed Marcus was merely an irritating mechanic. He believed Marcus was playing politics. And Blake Mercer hated losing. Across the base, Evan approached Marcus carrying 2 coffees. One for the man who saved my life. Marcus accepted it. You planning to say that every morning? Probably. Marcus shook his head. Evan leaned against the workbench. I've been thinking about what you told me. That sounds dangerous. About ejecting. Marcus's faint smile vanished. My father used to say something similar. Marcus froze. Evan didn't notice. He was a fighter pilot. Marcus slowly set down his coffee. What was his name? Nathan Cole. For the first time since Evan had met him, Marcus Reed looked genuinely shaken. Evan frowned. You knew him? Marcus stared at the young pilot's face. Suddenly he saw it. The eyes, the same stubborn expression, the same slight tilt of the head. The son of the man whose final voice had haunted Marcus for years was standing directly in front of him. Marcus opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Evan's expression changed. You did know him. Marcus looked away. Before he could answer, alarms sounded across Falcon Ridge. A maintenance emergency had been reported on the active taxiway. Marcus turned toward the hangar doors. At almost the same moment, Mercer appeared outside with 2 security personnel. He pointed directly at Marcus. Reed, you're done on the flight line. Marcus stared at him. Mercer held up a newly filed procedural order. This time, you're not talking your way around it. Behind Mercer, another fighter was already beginning to taxi. And Marcus heard something that made the blood drain from his face. A mechanical whine. Wrong. Dangerously wrong. Marcus forgot about the security officers the moment he heard that sound. The fighter was already taxiing toward the runway. A thin mechanical whine rose beneath the engine noise. Marcus stepped toward the flight line. Mercer blocked him. "Where do you think you're going?" "Move." Mercer almost laughed. "You're restricted from the active line. There's something wrong with that aircraft." "Of course there is." Marcus tried to step around him. Mercer grabbed his arm. "Every jet you see suddenly has a problem when you need attention." Marcus looked at Mercer's hand. "Let go." Something in his voice made one security officer shift uneasily. Mercer released him but remained in front of the doorway. Outside, the fighter continued taxiing. Marcus listened. The whine changed pitch. His face tightened. Hydraulic pressure. Mercer shook his head. Not again. Marcus turned toward a nearby radio. "Tyler." Tyler looked up. "Get ground control. Stop that aircraft." Mercer stepped between them. "Nobody does anything." Evan appeared from the adjoining hangar. "What happened?" Marcus pointed toward the fighter. "Listen." Evan tried. All he heard was the engine. "I don't hear anything." "You will." The aircraft turned toward the runway. Then Marcus saw it. A tiny hesitation in the right control surface. "Stop him!" Marcus ran. "Reed." Mercer's shout followed him. Marcus crossed the safety boundary. The security officers hesitated. Mercer didn't. "Bring him back!" Marcus sprinted onto the edge of the taxiway, waving both arms above his head. The fighter continued forward. The pilot saw him. Marcus crossed his forearms sharply. "Emergency shutdown." The pilot hesitated. Mercer reached Marcus and seized his shoulder. "Have you lost your mind?" Marcus ripped free. "Shut it down." The urgency in his voice carried across the concrete. Inside the cockpit, the pilot made his decision. The fighter stopped. Its engine began winding down. Mercer stared at Marcus with fury. "You just stopped an active aircraft without authorization." Marcus wasn't looking at him. He was staring beneath the fighter. 1 second passed. Then another. A dark drop struck the concrete. Then another. Suddenly, hydraulic fluid began streaming from beneath the fuselage. Evan's face went pale. "Jesus." Ground crew rushed toward the aircraft. A technician crouched beside the leak. "Pressure line failure." Silence surrounded Mercer. Marcus had been right. Again, had the fighter accelerated for takeoff, the failure could have occurred in the air. The pilot climbed from the cockpit and looked down at the spreading fluid. Then he looked at Marcus. "You saw that?" "He heard it," Evan said. Mercer turned on him. "Stay out of this." "No." Evan stepped forward. "You tried to stop him. I followed procedure. You almost let that aircraft take off because you wanted Reed to be wrong." Mercer's face hardened. "Watch yourself, Captain." Evan didn't move. "My life was almost on Falcon 27 yesterday. Now his." He pointed toward the second pilot. "How many times does Marcus have to be right before your ego stops being more important than our lives?" People nearby fell silent. Mercer knew they were watching. That made everything worse. He turned toward Marcus. "You think this makes you special?" Marcus stared at him. "No." "You love this, don't you? Everybody looking at you." Marcus's voice stayed quiet. "A man almost took a damaged aircraft into the sky, and you're still worried about who's looking at me." Mercer stepped closer. "I think you're manufacturing drama." Tyler stared at him. "You think Marcus broke the hydraulic line?" "I think he's been inserting himself into operations since we arrived." Marcus looked almost disappointed. "You'd rather believe sabotage than admit a mechanic knew something you didn't." Mercer's jaw tightened. "You're done here." He turned to security. "Escort him off the active line." One officer hesitated. "Chief, given what just happened, that's an order." Marcus raised a hand. "It's fine." Tyler shook his head. "No, it isn't." Marcus picked up his toolbox. "Don't turn this into something bigger." "It already is," Evan said. Marcus looked at him. For an instant, he saw Nathan Cole again. That made staying harder. But Marcus walked away. As he passed Mercer, the SEAL chief leaned closer. "You should have stayed invisible." Marcus stopped. He turned. "You keep thinking invisible means unimportant." Then he walked into the hangar. Mercer watched him go. For the first time, nobody around Mercer laughed. Minutes later, Colonel Bennett arrived. She examined the failed pressure line, heard the witnesses, then looked toward Mercer. "We'll discuss this." Mercer knew from her tone that he was losing control of the situation. Before he could answer, the tower radio crackled. "Falcon Ridge ground, Viper lead, flight of 4, 20 miles west, inbound." Zara froze. Marcus, standing inside the hangar, heard it too. "Viper lead." He slowly turned toward the radio. Another transmission followed. "Requesting recovery, runway 27. Marcus knew that voice. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Hayes. Years ago, Daniel had been a reckless young fighter pilot who believed courage meant never admitting fear. Marcus had taught him otherwise. Sarah looked toward the hangar. Marcus shook his head slightly. Don't. She understood. But there was nothing she could do about the aircraft already approaching Falcon Ridge. 4 fighters appeared against the Nevada sky. Evan walked beside Marcus. You know that squadron? Marcus didn't answer. The fighters descended toward the runway. Mercer approached again, still carrying the restriction order. Read. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Not now. Mercer held out the paper. You're leaving before those pilots reach this apron. The first fighter touched down. Then the second. Then the third. Marcus watched them taxi closer. Old insignia. Familiar formation spacing. Memories he had buried beneath years of grease and silence. Sarah stood several yards away. She knew exactly what was about to happen. Mercer didn't. He pointed toward the exit. Move, mechanic. The lead fighter rolled to a stop. Its canopy opened. Daniel Hayes climbed down. He removed his helmet. Then he looked across the flight line, straight at Marcus, and stopped dead. Daniel Hayes stood beneath the wing of his fighter, helmet hanging loosely from one hand. For several seconds, he didn't move. Marcus wished he would. Walk toward operations. Look somewhere else. Pretend he hadn't seen him. But Daniel's eyes remained fixed on the older black mechanic standing beside a battered toolbox. Mercer noticed the pilot staring. What? He muttered. Then he turned back to Marcus. I said move, grease man. The words carried farther than Mercer intended. Daniel heard them. His expression changed immediately. He handed his helmet to a ground crewman and began walking across the apron. Behind him, the other 3 fighter pilots climbed from their aircraft. Marcus lowered his eyes. Don't, he whispered. Evan heard him. Don't what? Marcus didn't answer. Daniel kept coming. Mercer stepped into Marcus's path and pointed toward the hangar exit. You've interfered with operations twice. I'm not telling you again. Marcus remained still. Mercer reached for the toolbox. Maybe you understand this language. He lifted it from the ground. Marcus's head snapped up. Put that down. Mercer smirked. There it is. He dropped the toolbox. It struck the concrete. The latch burst open. Sockets, wrenches, and small tools scattered across the flight line. Tyler stared in disbelief. Evan stepped forward. What the hell is wrong with you? Marcus raised one hand. Leave it. He crouched and began collecting his tools. Mercer looked down at him. That's better. Finally doing something you're qualified for. Daniel stopped 10 feet away. He had heard everything. Chief. Mercer turned. He immediately recognized Daniel's rank. Sir. Daniel didn't acknowledge him. His eyes remained on Marcus. Marcus slowly stood. The 2 men faced each other. Daniel looked older than Marcus remembered. Gray at the temples, lines around his eyes. But Marcus could still see the 24-year-old lieutenant who had once walked into his briefing room convinced he was invincible. Daniel's voice softened. Sir? Marcus shook his head. Daniel. That single word changed the pilot's face. It was him. Daniel straightened. His heels came together. Then his right hand rose sharply to his brow. A perfect salute. Nobody moved. Mercer's expression went blank. Marcus stared at Daniel. You don't have to do that. Yes, sir. One of the other fighter pilots approached. Major Rachel Turner. She looked at Marcus. Her eyes widened. No way. She immediately came to attention. Her hand rose. Colonel. A third pilot recognized him. Then the fourth. Within seconds, 4 fighter pilots stood in a line saluting the mechanic Mercer had just ordered to pick up tools from the concrete. Conversations across the apron stopped. Ground crews turned. Tyler's mouth fell open. Evan looked from Marcus to the pilots. Then back again. Mercer gave a confused laugh. What is this? Nobody answered him. Daniel lowered his salute only after Marcus finally returned it. Marcus's movement was reluctant, almost painful. Daniel smiled. It's been a long time. Not long enough, apparently. Daniel laughed softly. Say Marcus. Then emotion replaced the smile. We thought we'd never see you again. Marcus looked around. More people were watching now. This isn't the place. Daniel glanced toward the scattered tools. I think maybe it is. Marcus's expression hardened. Daniel. The warning was unmistakable. Daniel stopped. He understood. There were things Marcus wasn't ready to have dragged into daylight. Mercer didn't. He stepped forward. Can somebody explain why 4 fighter pilots are saluting a civilian mechanic? Rachel looked at him as though the question itself were absurd. You seriously don't know? No. Daniel glanced at Marcus. Marcus shook his head. But the secret had already cracked open. Daniel turned toward Mercer. You should probably think carefully about how you speak to him. Mercer's humiliation returned as anger. With respect, sir, this man has repeatedly interfered with an active joint exercise. Evan stepped in. He stopped two unsafe aircraft. I wasn't talking to you. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Chief, I'd recommend you stop talking for a minute. Mercer fell silent. Marcus bent down and picked up the last wrench. Daniel immediately crouched to help. Marcus stared at him. You're a lieutenant-colonel. And? You have people for this now. Daniel picked up a socket. You taught me never to walk past something that needed doing. That sentence struck Marcus harder than the salute. He looked away. Rachel joined them. Then Evan. Then Tyler. Within seconds, officers and mechanics were helping collect the tools Mercer had scattered. Mercer stood alone. Nobody had ordered them. That made it worse. When the toolbox was closed, Daniel handed it back to Marcus. Still carrying this old thing? It works. You always said that about everything older than you. Marcus almost smiled. For the first time, Evan saw something different in him. Not the quiet mechanic. Not the wounded man who had warned him about ejecting. A leader. Someone these pilots remembered without needing medals to remind them. Evan finally asked the question everyone was thinking. Marcus, who were you? Marcus looked at him. Before he could answer, Mercer stepped forward. Yeah, I'd like to know that too. Colonel Sarah Bennett approached from behind them. She carried a thin folder, the restricted service file. Marcus saw it immediately. Sarah. She stopped. I know. Mercer looked between them. What is going on? Daniel's expression hardened. You've spent 3 days insulting a man you don't understand. Mercer folded his arms. Then explain him. Daniel looked at Marcus one last time. Marcus closed his eyes. For years he had hidden from this moment. From the name. From the rank. From the memories that came with both. When he opened his eyes, Sarah was standing beside him. Mercer pointed toward Marcus. Who exactly is this mechanic? Sarah opened the folder. Her eyes settled on the first page. Then she looked directly at Mercer. You wanted to know who Marcus Reed is? The entire flight line seemed to hold its breath. Sarah turned the file toward him. At the top was a photograph of Marcus in a flight suit. Beneath it were 3 words Mercer never expected to see. Colonel Marcus Reed. Daniel stood straighter. Then he spoke the name that had once carried across combat radios thousands of feet above hostile ground. Atlas. Marcus closed his eyes. The past had finally found him. Mercer stared at the photograph, then at Marcus, then back at the file. Colonel Nell. The word barely left his mouth. Marcus said nothing. Sarah turned another page. Colonel Marcus Reed, former commanding officer of the 91st Tactical Fighter Wing. The silence across the flight line deepened. Tyler looked at Marcus as though the man he had worked beside for years had suddenly become a stranger. Evan couldn't speak. Mercer finally shook his head. He's retired. Marcus looked at him. Yes. So he's still a civilian mechanic? Yes. Mercer seemed relieved to have found something he could hold on to. Then nothing changes. Daniel Hayes stepped forward. Everything changes if you think rank is the only reason you should respect someone. Mercer's face tightened. I didn't say that. You called him Grease Man. Mercer said nothing. You threw his tools on the ground. Still nothing. And according to Captain Cole, you tried to override his safety warnings. That was an operational disagreement. Sarah closed the folder. No, that's what we're going to discuss now. Mercer's confidence disappeared. Sarah turned toward George Miller. Bring me the Falcon 27 inspection records. George handed her a tablet. Sarah read aloud. Initial warning submitted by Marcus Reed. Aircraft hold recommended. Actuator inspection requested. She scrolled. Then an expedited return to service request was submitted 17 minutes later. She looked up. By Chief Mercer. Mercer straightened. The exercise schedule was being compromised. The aircraft had not been cleared. I believe the concern was exaggerated. Evan stared at him. You gambled with my life because you thought Marcus was exaggerating? I relied on the initial diagnostic. Marcus finally spoke. You relied on the answer you wanted. Mercer turned toward him. And you think you're perfect? No. The answer came instantly. Marcus stepped forward. I know exactly what it costs when a decision in the air goes wrong. Daniel lowered his eyes. Sarah opened another section of Marcus's record. Maybe they should understand why. Marcus looked at her. Sarah. She stopped. Daniel spoke quietly. Let me. Marcus's jaw tightened. Then he nodded once. Daniel faced the others. Years ago, our formation entered a recovery mission under conditions most pilots would have considered impossible. Marcus looked toward the runway. Nobody expected all of us to return, Daniel continued. Colonel Reed brought almost everyone home. Almost. The word cut through Marcus. We lost one pilot, Daniel said. Major Nathan Cole. Evan went completely still. My father? Daniel turned. Yes. Evan looked at Marcus. Marcus could no longer avoid his eyes. You knew him. Marcus nodded. He was my friend. Evan's voice trembled. You were there? I was leading the formation. The anger Evan expected to feel didn't come. Instead, he remembered Marcus warning him beside Falcon 27. Don't fight the aircraft. Eject. You were the commander my father talked about. Marcus frowned. Evan swallowed. My mother kept his letters. He wrote about Atlas. Marcus looked stunned. He said if everything went wrong, Atlas was the man he wanted on the radio. Marcus looked away. For nearly 2 decades, he had remembered only Nathan's final transmission. Get them home, Commander. He had never imagined Nathan had written those words. Daniel continued. Colonel Reed blamed himself anyway. He left command not long afterward. Sarah looked around the flight line. And there's something else. She opened another record. Several emergency flight control procedures currently used at Falcon Ridge were developed from Colonel Reed's post-mission recommendations. Tyler stared at Marcus. So the procedure we used on Falcon 27? Sarah nodded. Marcus helped write its predecessor. Mercer had no response. The mechanic he had mocked for pretending to understand fighter pilots had helped create the safety doctrine protecting them. Sarah turned toward Mercer. Effective immediately, you are removed from your leadership role in this exercise pending formal review. Mercer's face changed. Colonel, your unit command will receive the documentation. I was trying to keep the mission on schedule, and somewhere along the way, keeping schedule became more important to you than listening to the people responsible for safety. Mercer looked toward the watching personnel. Humiliation burned across his face. Marcus recognized it, and he knew what came next if nobody stopped it. Enough. Everyone looked at him. Marcus walked toward Mercer. Mercer expected triumph. He found none. You want me embarrassed? Mercer said quietly. No. You've got everyone watching. I know. Then enjoy it. Marcus shook his head. This is exactly what you still don't understand. Mercer frowned. Marcus pointed toward the maintenance crews, pilots, security personnel, and operators surrounding them. Leadership isn't measured by how many people have to obey you. His voice remained calm. It's measured by how many people can trust you when their lives are in your hands. Mercer looked away. Marcus continued. You didn't fail because you insulted me. Mercer looked back. You failed because once you decided I was beneath you, you stopped listening. The words hit harder than shouting could have. If Tyler had warned you, would you have listened? Mercer remained silent. If a fuel technician had warned you, nothing. If someone cleaning this hangar noticed smoke coming from an aircraft, would their job title make the fire less real? Mercer's eyes dropped. Marcus stepped back. That's what you need to answer. Sarah nodded toward security. Mercer was escorted toward operations. Nobody laughed. Nobody applauded. Marcus had made sure of that. Evan approached him after the crowd began dispersing. For a moment, neither man knew what to say. Finally, Evan held out his hand. My father trusted you. Marcus looked at it, then took it. I wish I'd brought him home. Evan tightened his grip. You brought everyone he died protecting home. Marcus's eyes filled, but he refused to look away. For nearly 20 years, guilt had told him only one version of that night. For the first time, someone had offered him another. Behind them, Daniel prepared his squadron for departure. Sarah closed Marcus's service file. You know this isn't finished. Marcus glanced at her. The investigation? That too. She looked toward the hangar. But Falcon Ridge needs someone who understands why mechanics and pilots should never stop listening to each other. Marcus gave her a suspicious look. Don't. Sarah smiled. We'll talk tomorrow. Marcus picked up his battered toolbox. For the first time since the pilots had saluted him, he didn't seem ashamed of being recognized. He looked toward the fighters glowing beneath the Nevada sunset. Atlas had been revealed, but the most important decision Marcus Reed would make had nothing to do with returning to his old rank. It was whether he was finally ready to stop punishing himself for surviving. 3 weeks later, Falcon Ridge felt different. The maintenance hangar was still loud. Fighters still screamed across the Nevada sky. Ground crews still rushed between aircraft before sunrise. But something had changed. People listened now. The formal investigation into Blake Mercer was completed after reviewing flight records, maintenance reports, radio communications, and witness statements. The conclusion was clear. Mercer had repeatedly dismissed legitimate safety concerns, attempted to pressure personnel into returning an aircraft to service, and abused his leadership position during the exercise. He was removed from his leadership assignment and required to complete formal command and operational respect training before returning to a comparable role. He also had one final responsibility. He had to face the people he had treated as though they were beneath him. The maintenance crew gathered inside Hangar 3. Mercer entered without the confidence he had carried 3 weeks earlier. He stopped in front of them. "I owe you an apology." Nobody spoke. Mercer looked at Tyler first. "I dismissed your concerns because I thought your position made your opinion less important." Then he looked at George. "I was wrong." Finally, he turned toward Marcus. The room became silent. "I treated you like you were beneath me." Marcus said nothing. Mercer continued. "I was wrong about that too." Marcus studied him for several seconds. Then he nodded. "Then prove it." Mercer looked confused. "How?" "Listen when someone speaks." That was all Marcus said. No humiliation, no revenge, no reminder of the salute. He didn't need one. Weeks passed. Captain Evan Cole returned to flight training. The damaged actuator from Falcon 27 was mounted inside a small display case near the maintenance office. There was no photograph of Marcus beside it. No title, no medal, just one simple inscription. "Listen before it's too late." Evan visited Marcus before every major sortie. Sometimes they talked about aircraft. Sometimes they talked about Nathan. Slowly, Marcus stopped avoiding the subject. One evening, Evan brought him a letter his father had written years earlier. Marcus hesitated before opening it. The handwriting was unmistakable. Nathan had written about Marcus, about Atlas, about the commander who could make terrified young pilots believe they were capable of surviving impossible missions. Marcus read the letter twice. Then he folded it carefully. For the first time in 20 years, he allowed himself to cry. Not because the pain had disappeared, because he finally understood that remembering Nathan did not have to mean punishing himself. The next morning, Sarah Bennett found Marcus beneath a fighter aircraft. "You're still here." Marcus looked up. "Aircraft don't repair themselves." Sarah smiled. "I have a proposal." Marcus sighed. I knew that was coming. She offered him a position as a senior flight safety advisor. Not commander, not colonel, not a ceremonial title. Just someone whose experience could help pilots and mechanics recognize danger before it became tragedy. Marcus stared at the paperwork. "I'll keep working in the hangar." "That's fine. And I don't want an office." "I assumed that." Marcus smiled. "Then maybe." The months that followed changed Falcon Ridge. Pilots began spending time with maintenance crews before major exercises. Mechanics were invited into safety briefings. Young officers learned that asking a mechanic for advice wasn't weakness. It was professionalism. And whenever Marcus walked across the flight line in his old coveralls, people no longer saw a man who had somehow fallen from greatness. They saw a man who had chosen humility after greatness. One clear morning, Daniel Hayes prepared to leave with his squadron. He climbed into his fighter and checked the controls. Before closing the canopy, he looked toward the hangar. Marcus stood beside his toolbox. Daniel raised his hand. "A salute." Marcus shook his head with a smile. But Daniel kept his hand raised. So Marcus finally returned it. The fighter taxied toward the runway. Evan's aircraft followed. Then Rachel's. 4 jets accelerated across the Nevada desert and climbed into the blue sky. Marcus watched until they disappeared. Sarah stood beside him. "You know," she said, "you could have told Mercer who you were on day 1. Marcus smiled. "He wouldn't have listened." Sarah thought about it, then nodded. "No, he probably wouldn't have." Marcus picked up his toolbox. That was the point. He walked back toward the hangar. He hadn't needed the salute. He hadn't needed the title. He hadn't needed anyone to call him Colonel Reed. The truth had always been simpler. A person's worth doesn't disappear when the uniform comes off. It doesn't shrink because their hands are covered in grease. And it certainly doesn't depend on whether powerful people recognize their name. Marcus Reed had once commanded fighter pilots. Now he repaired the machines they flew. Both jobs required the same thing. Care, discipline, and the willingness to protect someone else when nobody was watching. Above him, 4 fighters crossed the morning sky. Marcus looked up. For the first time in years, he didn't hear Nathan's final transmission. He heard the engines. Strong, steady, alive. And that was enough. Never judge a person by their uniform, job title, or appearance. The quietest person in the room may carry the greatest courage, wisdom, and sacrifice. True character is revealed by how we treat people when we believe they have nothing to offer us. If Marcus's story touched you, share your thoughts below and subscribe for more stories about dignity, justice, and second chances.